These are the solutions for the study guide for quiz 23. So on this quiz, you're not going to be able to use a calculator to do any of the calculations, so we're going to leave the answers in the exact form. For the first type, though, we're going to graph. And so when I graph, I've got two ways of coming up with the vertex. So that's how I have to do it first. And so I'm going to end up using the axis of symmetry formula, which goes x equals negative b over 2a. So this is going to give me the axis of symmetry for this quadratic. So the b term is negative 2, so it's the opposite of negative 2, over 2 times the a term, which is 1. So remember, your a term is right here. This is our b term. And so when I go ahead and do this work, opposite of negative makes a positive, so 2 over 2 makes 1. So now I'm going to find out what the y component of the vertex is. So I take my x value and substitute it into the equation. And so when I do this, my first two terms are going to be opposite in sign, and one's going to be double the other if you ignore the negative sign. That's what I get here. 1 squared is 1, minus 2, and then minus 3. So this makes negative 1 minus 3, which makes negative 4. So my vertex, which is not the answer, but just helps me come up with the answer, is an ordered pair, 1 comma negative 4, not 3 there, so let me fix that. 1 comma negative 4. So I'm going to go over one space and then down 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Put the dot there and then use the parent graph. The parent graph is this, y equals x squared. So if I substitute 1 in for x, that means left or right, one space. In the y direction, I go up one space, so over 1, up 1, and check the y-intercept, see if that matches the equation. This is negative 3, so right here, y-intercept's negative 3. So yes, I know I'm doing something right. So I continue on. If I square 2, I end up getting 4. And so over from the vertex, always over 2, up 4 spaces. And right there, I'm going to hit the the x-axis, and that's what I'm looking for here, because my solutions for this are where the quadratic crosses the x-axis, and that's this point here and this point here. So this is negative 1, and this point here is 3 spaces to the right, so positive 3. So those are my solutions. Don't put it in parentheses. You put in a brace, you can just put a box around those two numbers, but those are my two answers, and that's what I'm looking for. The next problem is going to be different in that the a term is not just 1. It is 1/2 in this case. The b term is 2, so I'm going to substitute into the axis symmetry formula. So the opposite of b, so negative 2 over 2 times 1/2. So that makes negative 2 over 1, which just makes negative 2. So I substitute in to find out what the y component of the vertex is. So 1/2 times by negative 2 squared, and then plus 2 times by negative 2. So this makes 4. Half of 4 is 2. Over here I get negative 4, and that makes negative 2. So my vertex is going to be negative 2 comma negative 2. So over 2 spaces to the left, down 2 spaces. And then I'm using the parent graph. So it's a y equals 1/2 x squared. And so if you square 1, you get 1, and then you multiply that by 1/2, and you get 1/2. So over one space, up just 1/2 a space. And then over 2 spaces, left or right, you square that, you get 4. You take half of 4, you get 2. So over 2 spaces from the vertex, up 2 spaces. And again, that y-intercept is 0, and that's what this shows here. There's no value. If you go ahead and plug in zeros for x, you get y equals 0. And it's crossed the x-axis already. So our solutions are where it crosses. Again, this point here and this point here. That's what I want to write down as my answers. So negative 4 for the one over here. This one is 0. And those are my two solutions. So in braces, or just a box around them. So the next problem is asks us to factor. So the first thing you're going to want to do is set it equal to 0. So we've got x squared minus 5x plus 4 equals 0. So from that point, I can go ahead and factor. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to make a positive 4. So since they add to make a negative, I know they're both negative. And the numbers that multiply to make 4 are going to be 4 and 1. They work out because if you look at the inside terms make negative 4x, outside terms make negative 1x. Those do add to make negative 5x. So it does work out. So now we set them equal to 0. each of the factors, set them equal to 0 to find out what the two values of x are that make this product 0. So when I go ahead and add the 4, you can see how one of the answers is x equals 4. Here I have to add the 1. You can see how the other answer is x equals 1. So 1 and 4, those are the two solutions. So moving on to the next 3 problems, and it's another factoring problem. So it's already set up for us. A little tougher because we got 15 for the A term. Start with the prime number though if you've got it. I've got a prime number there. So 3 and 1, the only numbers that multiply to make 3. The next thing is the outside terms and inside terms. Outside minus the inside, because they're opposite sign, make 4x. And so I'm going to end up trying to break the 15 down. I'm going to break it down to 3x here. I picked 3 here because I'm going to have to multiply it by this 3, and that's going to give me 9. I didn't want it to be too big. I'm going to put the 5x here. And you see this does work out. It's because I have 9x and 5x for the inside and outside terms, and those do subtract to make 4x. Now to make it a positive 4, I'm going to make 9 positive, 5 negative. That'll give me a positive 4. So positive 9 means a plus sign in front of the 3 and a minus sign with the 1. So now I've got it set up. I know the factoring's done right. I'm going to take the two factors and set them equal to 0. And so when I do that, I've got to do 2 steps here. So I got to subtract 3 first. I got 5x equals negative 3. Then I have to divide by 5, and that's the part that sometimes people will forget to do. So negative 3/5. Over here I have to add the 1, but I still have the 3 out in front of x. So I divide by 3, and I get the answer 1/3. So negative 3/5 and positive 1/3 are the two solutions. Next problem is solving by completing the square. So you got to use the method that's given to us or asked of us to do. So I'm going to subtract the 2x from all sides. I've got x squared minus 2x equals 6. Leave a little gap here. We need to figure out what to add to complete the square. So to do that, take the b term and divide it by 2. Take half of it. And so that makes negative 1. Square that. That makes positive 1. That's the number that you're going to add to both sides. That completes the square. That makes this a perfect square. We just did this right there. We completed the square. And so what that looks like is a binomial, if we factor it, that is exactly the same as the other binomial, to make x squared minus 2x plus 1. So how did I get x minus 1? Well, it's whatever half the b term is goes inside the parentheses. Negative 1 times negative 1 make a positive 1. Negative 1 plus a negative 1 make a negative 2, so it works out. Over here, 6 and 1, that's where I'm getting the 7 from. So now I take the square root of both sides, and I'm left with x minus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 7. Here's why I'm not using a calculator, because we don't have to do the square root of 7. We just need to leave it in the exact form. So the next part is add the 1 to both sides, and you have your answer. 1 plus or minus the square root of 7, and that's it. So next problem, a little bit tougher. First step is to add the 12. And so now I've got 2x squared minus 5x equals 12. Again, I leave that gap. Next step, get rid of the 2 in front of the x squared. You got to get rid of the a term. So x squared minus 5 halves x, and then equals 6. So here's where it gets a little complicated, so you just got to pay close attention to your numbers, but it's not so bad. Negative 5 halves, and you got to take half of that. And so leave it in the fraction form. It'll be much easier because you're only dealing with 2 integers this way, negative 5 and positive 4. So I got negative 5/4 by multiplying straight across, but now I've got to square that answer. And so I square that, and that's going to give me 25/16. So here's the tough part. We've got to add 25/16 to 6. Add 25/16 to complete the square. And the factoring is really easy. It's whatever you get for half your b term. X minus 5/4 quantity squared. Whatever half the b term is always goes inside the parentheses. The tough part is adding these two numbers together. So I'm going to treat that as 6 over 1. I'm going to multiply that 6 by 16. That'll give me a common denominator. So up to the top here, I'll go ahead and write out that makes 96/16 plus 25/16. So So I just did 16 times by 6, made 96 sixteenths. Again, 16 times by 1 made 16. I add those two numbers together, and that gives me 121 sixteenths. Okay, so that's the number that this equals. So from there, I go ahead and take the square root of both sides, and I've got x minus 5/4 equals plus or minus 11/4. So you see, square root of 121 is 11, square 16 is 4. So from this point, again, you should already have common denominators. If you don't, you know you're doing something wrong. So I do, so I know I'm doing something right this time, and so I go ahead and add 5/4 to both sides, and I got two problems to set up: 11/4 plus 5/4, and I've got negative 11/4 plus 5/4. And so that's going to give me 16/4, which makes 4. Over on this side, I get negative 6/4, which makes negative 3/2. So those are our solutions. For the first 6, let's take a look at the next problem here. And it is right here. It says solve by the quadratic formula. So quadratic formula, I'm going to go ahead and move both of these terms over, 7x and the 2. So whenever I move a term over, it just switches signs. So it's x squared minus 7x plus 2 equals 0. Once I've got that figured out, I substitute into the quadratic formula. Remember, it goes negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we're just substituting the numbers in. So the opposite of negative 7, so 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, c is 2, all over 2 times by 1. So that makes 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 minus 8. And this is all over 2. So 7 plus or minus the square root of, and that makes 41 all over 2. And that's it. That's as far as we have to go. Now if you moved the x squared over, it would be a negative a term. So the difference here, and c would end up being negative as well. So it'd still have the same number underneath the radical sign here. The difference is that your answer would have a negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 41 over negative 2. So this is a fine answer as well. They mean the same exact thing. So in this problem, it's set up for us for the quadratic formula. So we'll go ahead and substitute our numbers in. B term, well, there's our a is 2, b is negative 1, and c is negative 1. So it's going to be a 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 1, all over 2 times 2. So I do some more work there. 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 plus 8. Plus because negative times a negative makes a positive, and this is all over 4. So we'll be able to take the square root because it's a perfect square. And when I do that, I get plus or minus 3 that I have to do to the 1. So it's 1 plus 3 over 4, which makes 4/4, which makes 1. And then next one is, right here, I'll do it, 1 minus 3 over 4, which makes negative 2/4, which makes negative 1/2. So those are the two solutions that we end up seeing. And the last problem asks us to find three things. Time to maximum height first. Time to maximum height is just the axis of symmetry formula, negative b over 2a. And so I end up doing the b term, which is negative 40 over 2 times by a, which is negative 5. So that makes negative 40 over negative 10, which makes 4. So that's 4 seconds to max height. And so time to max height, there's 4 seconds I'll put in there. And so now I need what the maximum height is. So now I'm going to solve for h, substituting what the time to the maximum height is in for h. So 4 seconds in for t, and plus 40 times by 4, and then plus 45. So doing some work there, this makes 4 times 4 makes 1600, and this makes 16 times negative 5 makes negative 80. And then I end up adding the 45. So what I'll end up noticing, and these two terms should be opposite sign, one double the other, and that's what we get here. So this ends up giving me 80 plus 45 adds to 125. And these are meters. There are going to be meters whenever it's -5. -16 would be feet. And so 125 meters. And the last part says the time it takes to impact the ground. So we're going to set h equal to 0, and I'm going to factor first. Take out the common factor of -5. They're all -5 in this case because we're doing it without the calculator, so it just makes it a little bit easier. So I've still got t squared, and then I divide each of the terms by -5. So -8t, and then a minus 9. And then I go ahead and factor. So bring down the -5. This factors to t minus 9 and t plus 1. So when I go ahead and solve for t, I get two answers. T is 9 and -1. Well, this is the extra answer, so I'm going to exclude that. I'm just going to go with the 9. So 9 seconds is the time in the air. So those are the types of problems you're going to see on this week's test. Good luck.